Topic for today is clavicles and the common mistakes and issues that I see students make with clavicles. So, the first thing we kind of have to ask ourselves is, what are clavicles? What are they? What do they do? Anatomically, clavicles are the things that connect our arms to our body. So this is a part of anatomy that is very tricky for people to understand at first. So let's actually just take a look at a skeleton here. So we have our rib cage, that's right in the center of our body, and then our arms connect to our body. Now, it doesn't connect directly to the rib cage. It is connected to the rib cage by the clavicle and the scapula. The scapula is the shoulder blade on the back of your body. So you've got your clavicle up here. That's this bone right there. If you feel it, you can feel the gap there, and then the bone here goes out to your scapula. Your arm attaches to the scapula. So why is this important? This is important because that clavicle is your pivot point of the arm, where everything attaches. When you move your arm up and down, forward, back, you have your upper arm here that will move, but this entire area also moves. It is part of the arm and that whole process. So just as an example, here is some of the motion of the clavicle. We'll just watch a little bit of this. So if you move your arm up and you shrug, it's not just the shoulder moving up. It's the entire clavicle rotating from your sternum, which is the middle part here, that big bone there. It's pivoting from there. You have a pivot point right there. So as you're moving, your whole arm is actually pivoting from the center of your body. Why is that important? That's important because all of our motion needs to build off of that. Any arm motion that we do has to originate from this point. If we do not use the clavicle, nothing is going to work correctly in the entire upper chest area. The arms, the whole chest area won't work. So clavicles are an extremely important part of our anatomy. Okay, so we know that it's important now. Well, how come we forget about it? Well, honestly, it's a little tiny control. If we look at the rig, the clavicles are right here. Boop, it's tiny little control. And as we pose out the arm, I know when I started, I would look at the clavicle and go, the arm's the bigger thing. I'll just move that. Why do I need to move the little clavicle? I'll think about it later. Or, no one's going to really notice. It's not that big of a motion. Yes, it is. One of the biggest things that you can do wrong is not moving this. So, clavicles. They are very important. They connect our entire arm to our body, and that pivot point of the clavicle right at the sternum here in the center is extremely, extremely important. Now, because of this, there's a lot of common issues that I will tend to see with that clavicle. And it comes to a misunderstanding of, one, how it moves, and two, how we can use it and the things that we have to look out for in terms of its range of motion and how it reacts with the body. So let's jump in here and look at a few different things. So I'm just going to bring in my timeline. So time slider right here. And first, let me introduce you to Jules 0.5, version 0.5. So this is actually something I will do in my posing, is if ever you need to do some poses, but you don't have to worry about the face and doing a full facial expression. I've mentioned this before, just put a box over the character's head and parent it to their head. Yeah, it's basically Minecraft. And I've just parented this or constrained it, and haha, I've got a head in place. And now I can pose the character out without having to worry about the face. And I went a little overboard. I added ears and some hair, but honestly, you could just do a polygon cube and you're good. And the reason I did this is I don't want us to focus on the face. I just want us to focus on the body. Yeah, when renders go wrong, exactly. So let's start going over the common issues that I will see. And the very first one is the untouched. Basically, the clavicles haven't been moved at all. This is absolutely the most common issue. I see this happen every single term. It just happens. People do a pose. I was the same way. Do a pose, and we go, don't have to touch the clavicle. No, what? Nah, it's fine. The pose reads. Just don't. When you're moving your character, the clavicles have to be a part of it. If you're going to rotate that arm, move the clavicle. If you're going to pose the body, move the clavicle. It's part of it. It's as you're moving the body and the arms, anything in there, the clavicles need to be part of that process. Are the clavicles the shoulders? Yes, kind of. The shoulder, the reason I call it clavicles is that the shoulder isn't really an anatomical portion of the body. So let's go full screen here. Let me actually find this here. So the body is a lot of different bones, and the reason I don't call it a shoulder is that the shoulder is this whole region. The shoulder region kind of encompasses all of this. And there's no distinction in animation on what the shoulder actually is. Some people consider the shoulder to be the clavicle, this motion here, the shrug control, that. Other people consider the shoulder to be the rotation of the upper arm here. That's the shoulder moving. It's still the shoulder area. But to me, that's the upper arm moving. So it's also the shoulder. The shoulder is also the deltoid, which is the shoulder muscle right there. That big muscle on your shoulder, that's the deltoid. That's sometimes what people mention when they mean shoulder. So shoulder is like the whole region, and it can mean too many things. So when I kind of talk about animation, I like to separate it into the clavicle, which is very specifically that rotation there, the shrug rotation, versus the upper arm, or if you were talk about it in bone terms, the humerus, that upper arm bone there. So clavicle, humerus, or upper arm. And then the deltoid for the actual shape of the shoulder. Is that the reason, Catherine? You're just making me do this talk just because you want to hear more? Oh, I'm proud and sad at the same time. If that was the case, I would start to worry. Let's see. Do you have any advice on getting ourselves into the habit of including the clavicles in the pose, or is it just a matter of practice? It really just is a matter of practice. It's a matter of working your way through the rig. As I pose the rig, I am in the habit of making sure I look at every single control. It doesn't mean that I will pose it or that I have to pose it, but I think about it. So, for example, with this pose, I started with the hips, got that in the right spot. Then I did the spine. Then I do the clavicles. Then I do the arms. And then I'll go back and forth. I just work my way out. It's a process. And you just make sure that you don't skip any of those controls. So just for example, if I'm posing out the arm, I wouldn't just pose the lower arm, but not the upper arm. For example, if I was doing this, I wouldn't just go, haha, excitement. Why did I skip the upper arm? The upper arm is supposed to go like that. I didn't feel like it. But why? There's no reason. Same thing with clavicles. Why did I skip the clavicle when I'm doing this? There's really no reason it should be skipped. So it's building that habit of, if you're posing it out, you have to look at it. You have to think about it. So Once again, kind of coming back to this issue is oftentimes we just don't pose out the clavicles, especially when we're starting out. And the biggest reason that I tend to see is that we don't realize the importance of why the clavicles need to be pushed. It's just, it's there, but the arm is the bigger motion. The clavicle is just a little polishy thing. It's like, for example, we've got this little control at the back of the spine. I'm not going to really push that to push the line of action of the spine. I don't really need that right now. The clavicles, they're a polishy thing. I don't need that right now. No. Clavicles are a base portion of the anatomy. They have to be posed. So just keep that in mind. They are very, very important. So how do we solve this? How do we make it work? Well, honestly, all we need to do is make sure we key it. That's really it. So let me actually set a key here. Okay, perfect. And I'm gonna key the camera as well. There we go. So with this, there we go. How do we fix it? Well, we just move it. Now, how do we move the clavicles? That's kind of the next big question is, what do we do with them? Well, like people mentioned earlier, the clavicles typically have sympathetic motion. Sympathetic motion basically means that they move with something else, in this case, the arm. So let's go full screen here. If I was to reach my arm forward, the clavicle goes forward. If I bring my clavicle back to relax, you can see my arm only goes up to here. Clavicle does that. It goes forward. If I bring my arm back, that whole clavicle goes back. If I reach my arm up, the whole clavicle goes up. The clavicle goes in the direction of your arm most of the time. Not all of the time, but most of the time. So, how can we do this here? Well, let's start with this one. He's raising his arm up. Clavicle goes up. Like that. And look at the pose already. See that difference in there? There's so much more energy. It just ties the whole side of the character in there. Now he's going a little bit more forward as well. So I'll push that clavicle forward a little bit too. Like that. See how it ties up the whole side of the character. Now this one, he's going like that. So that clavicle might go down along with that arm. The arm is pointing down. Let's bring it down. Look at that line of action now that's getting created right through the shoulders there. The elbow is kind of going a little bit forward. So let's just bring that a little bit forward right there. When does the clavicle not follow the arm? We're actually going to be covering that a little bit, but basically the clavicle doesn't follow the arm when there's tension going into the character. That's usually pretty much one of the main areas. So for example, my arms are down right now. Let's go full screen. Arms are down, clavicles are following. They're rotated down a little bit. But then maybe I get scared. So there's tension, or I get angry and there's tension in the shoulders. My clavicles goes up, but my arms are still down. Or maybe I'm reaching forward and there's this moment where I touch something that's really hot. So I'm reaching forward, my clavicle is forward, but I touch something really hot. You get that like shock where the clavicle goes back before the arm has come back. So it's going to pull the arm back and then the arm comes back. So there's a little bit of a lead and follow right in there. It doesn't always follow 100%, just most of the time. And usually it's from an emotional or outside force that the clavicle will counter that motion. So let's push that clavicle up here a little higher. Now, sometimes the clavicles do get hidden away within the anatomy. So just go into wireframe and let's kind of push that just a little bit more, like so. Okay, we've pushed the clavicles. How does that feel? See the difference there? How boring those shoulders are? How that arm, now that we see it, it looks so broken. It's just like, ugh, what was wrong with it? Now we get that beautiful line of action, goes right from the hand all the way down into the other elbow. That's the secondary line of action. And we get that nice natural flow. So to solve the untouched, the clavicles that are not posed out correctly, we simply pose them. And the way we pose them typically is we just think of the sympathetic action. That's usually what it is. Other times it's just making sure that you think of the emotional state of your character. Okay, so that's common issue number 1. Common issue number 2, no flow. Now, what this usually means is that there is no connection between the different shoulders. We saw that a little bit in the last pose, but let's point it out a little bit more specifically here. So we've got the character, he's pointing, and we want this really intense shot and this really kind of cool moment here where he's pointing out to the killer or maybe yelling at someone to stop. And it's okay, it's decent. But if we look at the shoulders here, look at the line that we're creating. It's going through, back, and through. See how it's zigzagging here? From one arm into the body and then into the other arm. There's no flow to the characters. It's just bleh. Would we want that in the rest of our character? So for example, if we had the line of action in the body, which is kind of going here right now, would we want it to be like one way and then another and then like that? Not really. That loses the strength of it. So with the clavicles, we often see this, that moment where, because they're not posing the clavicles or not posing them correctly, it breaks the flow of the pose. So how do we fix this? Well, one of the things is look at your pose from as many angles as you can and see about trying to push that. Now, naturally, that flow should come in by default, but we can always double check. So let's fix this pose. So I'm going to come in here. There we go. And let's take that arm and first of all, connect it with sympathetic action. That clavicle should go forward. And then his arm is up. It's pointing upwards. So up, like that. All of a sudden, see how that line of the arm connects smoothly into the body? And we can exaggerate that a little bit more. Now, the other arm is pointing back. The elbow is going back. So let's bring that back here. And already that pose looks way stronger. And this is where I have a choice. I could do the sympathetic action and bring that shoulder down, or I could add tension by bringing it up. I have the choice. And this is where you have to ask yourself the question, what do you want? What is going to make this scene better? Do I want him to feel a little bit more relaxed and push that strength of the line here? Or do I want to add the tension and get that feeling? Let's kind of push the line here. And let's find that other clavicle. Right there. Usually you don't lose the clavicles this easily, but because I've got a big box head, it's going to be a little bit more easy to lose. Okay. So we've got that in there now. Now, if we look at the body here, look at the line that gets created in the arm. We went from this zigzag right here, into that. Nice, clean flow. Suddenly, our line of action is stronger. Our whole pose becomes more interesting. Even from here, you can see how it really connects those arms into the twist of the body and makes just the arms feel more natural. Honestly, this pose here didn't look terrible. It's not bad. But as soon as you connect that, you just feel like the muscles are activating correctly. It feels like the pose is just more, it's better. So creating that flow, really thinking of how you want that line to flow through the body is important, the line of action. Now, there's a question here. Should you only rotate the clavicles or do whatever you need to do to get into the pose? That's actually a very good question and actually goes into our next pose here, which is lost in translation. Do we rotate or translate the clavicles? Well, this is a open question because there's not really an answer. You can honestly do both. But I would just think of one thing, which is, how do the clavicles move naturally? Do they translate or do they rotate? If we think of the anatomy in that video we saw earlier, our clavicles are attached to our sternum right here in the center. And as I raise my clavicle, as if I shrug, it is pivoting from this point and rotating. What this means is that our clavicle has a circular range of motion. So as we move it, it doesn't just move straight up and down. If I was to pivot my hand here, you can see how the fingers, if I'm pivoting from the point, the fingers go closer to the head or closer to the body. It's not just doing this. It's rotating. So, if we translate, we're going to lose a little bit of that natural feeling of the motion. Things are not going to attach correctly. Now, is that a bad thing? Not really, as long as we use it smartly. So what I typically recommend, especially for people who are starting out, is start with the rotations first. Get as far as you can in a natural way with the rotations to start with. This way, you get that natural feeling of the clavicles. Then, if you need to push it further, then you use the translations to exaggerate. Now, the reason this is important is if you only use translations, you start to run into issues like this, where we're trying to get this tired, saggy shoulders. But look at what's happening to his chest. See how his chest is imploding? Because I translated these clavicles down, it's causing the chest to basically implode on itself. The character doesn't have enough, or basically it's pushing the geometry in an unnatural way. So, how do we solve that? Well, like we said earlier, let's just push the actual rotations first, then the translations. So, you can see here, we've got all our translates. Let's zero those out. We get this pose here, which definitely doesn't look tired anymore. And instead, I'm going to rotate them. And see how far I can rotate them, and watch the angle of the shoulders and the shoulder joint. See how eventually it starts to come inwards? How the shoulders get closer to the body? If we just translate down, see how those shoulders stay the exact same width. That's unnatural. Our body doesn't work like that. So this is going to give us that natural motion. And then let's kind of sag them forward a little bit here. And see how that feels compared to that. The shoulders are at about the same level. Pretty close. But that feels natural. We get the natural curve of the body as well as the natural folding of the musculature versus the translation that crushes the body. Now, once again, does it mean we should avoid translation completely? No, not at all. It just means we have to be careful, and the translation should be used as a tool for exaggeration, but not used as our base building tool. It just doesn't create the natural motion. It's, for example, like our head. Do we translate the head or do we rotate the head? Well, you don't want to translate the head because then you're going to start getting stuff like that. Now, if you're doing a very exaggerated cartoon, yeah, that could work. Otherwise, you rotate the head because our head rotates in real life. So think of how the body moves in reality. Try to copy that first and then exaggerate. Okay. So the translation issue. This is something I see a lot in student work where they'll translate more than they rotate. Just watch out for that. The next common issue that I tend to see, and Johan, thank you. And Tara, thank you as well. As soon as you guys posted that, it's like my lips are starting to get really dry. So let's go to the next common issue that I tend to see. Relax. A lot of people just don't relax their clavicles by default. And it makes for very uninteresting poses. If you want a character to feel natural, look at the angle that the shoulders create. If we look at the pose right now and kind of look at from shoulder to shoulder, it creates this flat line. And if we look at the outline of the shoulder, it's kind of just that shape right there. It's just basically flat. Most rigs are made like this by default. And this is because they are in a default T or A pose when they come in. Now, if we look at natural shoulders and look at the end point of your shoulder and then the point on your neck. So let's actually kind of look here. You see it a little bit better with t-shirts. See how low the shoulder is compared to the t-shirt point here? Right there? How low that is? That creates a triangular shape over your shoulders. You straight line here, it comes down there, and then the shoulders go up at an angle. That is a relaxed state for your shoulders. If you don't do this, what ends up happening is your rigs look like they're like this the whole time, with the shoulders flat, and it creates this very awkward, like nervous feeling to them, where they're always stressed. So even if the shoulders shouldn't really be doing anything, and you're, oh, I've posed them out enough, keep in mind that if you want to relax them, relaxed is quite a bit lower. It's hanging down. Your arm is dragging the clavicle down. So what this means is that if we want to relax this character and we actually want them to feel like there's a more natural feeling in their body, well, let's just rotate those down. So we're just going to go, whoop, look at that. Doesn't that feel more natural? Doesn't that feel relaxed? We're starting to get that triangular shape. If we go to corner, from corner to corner on the shoulder here, from here to here, and then up the shoulder, that nice triangular shape. This is what gets your characters to feel relaxed and like they are a natural human being. If you're not relaxing your shoulders, and then this one probably go forward a little bit, just a little. If you're not relaxing those shoulders, especially I see this a lot in vanilla walks where a character is walking forward, but their shoulders feel like they're super tense and they have to go to the washroom really bad, and they're just trying to get there super quick. It just doesn't look good. It doesn't look interesting. So relax the shoulders. It's very simple, and it makes a big difference in the end result. So if we kind of look here to here, you really feel that difference in the character. And Sylvia, hello, how's it going? So relax the character. Next issue I tend to run into a lot when I look at people's work, flatlining. So flatlining is an issue that usually comes up when people are trying to do this very dynamic pose, and then they push the shoulders and they push them to a point where they've lost the dynamic feeling of the pose. So at this point, we're starting to move the clavicles, but we're moving them too much or not paying attention to the composition that they create. So in this example here, we have this character flexing, doing this pose. And what's happening is if we look at the shoulders, they create this flat line, which destroys the dynamic feeling of the pose. We've got this beautiful line, or trying to get this beautiful line going through the character. The character is leaning forward, all of this dynamic stuff, and the shoulders are fighting against it. They create this boring flat line. So how do we solve this? Well, we just pay attention to the line of the shoulders and we try to exaggerate it a little bit more. So in this case, I'm just going to lower that clavicle here, maybe a little bit there, still keep it up so it feels like he's flexing and we get that shoulder action in there, and maybe raise the other one here, just like that. Now, the line of the shoulders is at an angle. And there we go. Very simple change. And let me actually do this on a different key so we can compare the two. So, once again, let's raise this one just a little bit. And then lower the other one. So something like that. And if we compare the two, you can see how that is a little bit more dynamic. This, it's creating that flat, boring element into the shoulders. So this one, honestly, I don't see that often, but it does happen quite a bit if you're not careful. So it's really just looking at your line of action, looking at the flow of your posing, make sure you avoid any character or any moment where the shoulders are just fighting against the pose you're trying to create. Okay, so flatlining, pretty simple one. Now, the counter contrapposto. This is more of a concept than an issue, but it's something I highly recommend people look for when they're looking at their clavicles. As we're taught how to pose, one of the big things that we're taught is contrapposto. Contrapposto is when the angle of your hips versus the angle of your shoulders contrast, and it makes this nice, elegant squash and stretch in the pose. It makes things feel really nice and dynamic, which is really good. And as animators, as we're posing out our characters, we pose out the spine, great, get all of that. And then, if we're not careful, we often try to pose out the shoulders to enhance the contrapposto, so that the shoulders go against the hips, because that's what we're taught. The clavicles don't have to do that. The clavicles can counter the contrapposto. So as you're posing, just be aware that this is not an issue. So, for example, let's just take this pose and move those arms the way they kind of should be. One arm is raised up, which means that that clavicle should come up here, like so. The other one, if I want to relax it, should come down, like so. And maybe even move it back a little bit and then move the other one just a little bit more forward, like that. Okay, if we look at our pose, we've lost our contrapposto. Oh no, doot, doot. Dang it, we've ruined our pose. No, the contrapposto is still there. It's in the chest. The actual ribs and the body are in contrapposto. The clavicles can counter the contrapposto. So now we get this extra flow. That is fine. And this is, again, why I don't like to call the clavicles the shoulders, because usually when we're thinking of contrapposto, it's shoulders and hips. And technically the shoulders are like they are contrasting still. We're still in contrapposto. But the clavicles don't have to follow. So just keep that in mind as you're posing, is that you don't have to follow this. The clavicles do not have to follow the contrapposto. In most cases they will, honestly, but they don't have to. So you have that bigger range of motion. You can see how this suddenly looks very awkward and janky, and especially that arm that's raising up there, it looks just uncomfortable compared to this that has more of a natural flow and feels more dynamic. And we still have our contrapposto. Okay, now, next issue I tend to see, and this is a big one. This is one I see a lot. The neck gap. When people raise their arms and leave a gap for the head and neck. Right here. When you raise your arm, especially if you're raising it in a big dynamic way, we talked about this before, the clavicle has a rotation. It's not a translation. That means that if the clavicle rotates up an extreme amount, it gets closer to the face. That's it. It doesn't just go up and down in just a shrug and then that's it. So when you bring your arm up and you really want to get a character to reach, keep in mind that the gap here, let's see if we can get the neck visible here. If I go up a lot, there's no gap here. My clavicle right there is pressed almost right into my neck because it's rotated up. Rotated, not translated. So you get that, especially like if I reach up kind of lazily, yeah, there's a gap. But if you want your character to really feel like they're reaching and get that last jar of cookies on the top of the fridge, or in the action movies, like just reach, grab my hand, that feeling, there's no gap unless I do this and I turn my head away. And now there's a little bit of a gap, but even then I could raise my arm even more. Look at how much that clavicle changes from there, relaxed, to there where it's reaching. That's a big change. I love my cookies. So negative space, we don't always need negative space. Negative space is one of those things where we pay attention to it. We want to make sure that it's shaped correctly, but not everything has to have negative space. For example, when you reach, you lose that negative space. So in essence, you are still thinking of negative space. You're just making sure that there is none. So in here, that neck gap, if we really want this character to feel like they're reaching for something, or like, hey, over here, like super excited to see someone, close the neck gap. So we're going to take this. The clavicle has been moved already, so it's already up, but push it like that. There we go. Now they feel excited. It's that much more interesting than this. See how this, it's okay. It works. The clavicle's moved up, but it's missing the excitement. Suddenly just that change, the character feels like, oh my God, hey, hello, 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 kind of just waving like crazy. They are so much more excited. That neck gap is something that we have to watch out for, especially if we were trying to exaggerate our posing. And the same thing happens when you shrug. When you shrug, you don't leave a gap there. Your shoulders come in and they get right up into your head. So close that neck gap. This is probably one of the more common ones I see, especially on more advanced posing, is, yeah, exactly. Wave like you do care. Exactly. Even with more advanced posing, I see this issue happening quite a bit where it's just not pushed enough. Okay. The next issue I see often, losing weight. And this basically comes down to having characters putting weight into their upper body. So in this case, leaning on a table, for example, or if characters lifting something heavy, you need to think of how the weight will affect the clavicles. If you don't, there's going to be no feeling of weight in the character. Now, there's no universal rule for this. Sometimes when you're lifting a heavy weight, so let's say I pick up something really heavy, my clavicles could get dragged down because of that extra weight. As I'm trying to lift it up, and let's go full screen here. I'm trying to lift it up and my clavicles are just dragged down. It's like I'm trying to lift it and I can't. That shows that my body has trouble lifting this weight and is just pulling. Or if something's pulling on a rope, it's pulling my clavicles forward. Now, you also have the opposite, where I'm trying to lift something up and I'm lifting it with my clavicles and I'm using my whole body to raise this heavy weight. Both work. The big thing is that you actually do it. If you don't do either, then there's no weight to the character and there's no weight to what they're holding. The clavicles play a big part in really selling weight and physicality when you're interacting with things. So for example, here, if I want to push this character's weight, he's leaning on the table, even though his arms are going forward, which would mean that the clavicles typically would move maybe a little bit forward and down, that's just relaxing him. We're not aiding in this or adding weight. We're just losing weight. This is one of those cases where we want to counter the motion. Even though his arms are going down and back, to sell the weight, we're going to push those clavicles up. And look at that. Suddenly we feel like there's weight being pushed into those arms. I can even push it forward to add a little bit of that anger in there. There we go. Suddenly, there's weight. Without that, it just feels like his hands are like just on the table and there's nothing going on. They're just loosely sitting on the table. It doesn't work. You push those clavicles up, suddenly you feel that weight. This is very, very important. And again, it's not always the contrast of like going up when he's pushing down. Sometimes it's going to be pushing forward. So for example, if your character is doing a push-up, when they go down, their shoulders are going to go back. When they push forward, their clavicles will go forward. It depends on what they're doing, but we have to think about that. We have to apply that in our shot. We can't just leave it at like a default state and go, there you go. You're not going to get weight out of it. So a very big element here. This is another one that I see a lot happening in people's shots. And then the last one, which is kind of tied into this as well, is the overly sympathetic. So I'll usually see this in animations more than single poses, but this will also happen in poses. We talked about how the clavicles in general are sympathetic. They move with the arm. So if I move my arm up, the clavicles go up. If I move my arm down, it goes down. It's not always the case. Sometimes it's going to be the opposite. Sometimes it's going to contrast. And this is where, as an animator, we need to study emotional states. We need to study posing. We need to look at reference. And we have to look at what the clavicles are doing. So for example, if a character is angry, so if I'm kind of start getting really angry, my clavicles could go down and kind of stretch a little bit as my arms go down. And this is especially true when you kind of get that indignant anger, like, oh, how dare you? And you get the stretch in the clavicles and the neck. But if I'm doing this, it's very hard to bring my head down and push the clavicles down. It just feels very weird. Instead, if I'm going to be angry that way, my head goes down and my clavicles goes up, even though my arms are down. It's that tension, everything building in and compressing. This is a squash versus the stretch, if we think of animation terms. So when the character is getting angry, even though the arms are down and might be really tense down by their side, the clavicles are countering that sympathetic action. That's what makes it dynamic. So as you're posing, even though the first question we think of, or the first thing we think of is, clavicle, sympathetic action, you also have to think, is that what I want? Is that what this scene needs? Can I make it better by countering? What is the emotional state? We ask any of those questions. So in this case, let's take those shoulders and just do the opposite. He's getting angry, so let's bring those shoulders up, kind of forward a little bit. And now, make sure I'm on the right key. Boop. Like that. Now that character feels angrier. We're thinking of the emotional state and how that will affect the clavicles and change its default behavior. It makes it more interesting. So, those are the big issues I tend to see with clavicles. And honestly, it really all comes down to just thinking about them and asking yourself, what do they need? In most cases, it's going to be the sympathetic action, and you want to make sure that they flow with the body, flow with the arms, and then kind of create a flow between each other. Other than that, the next thing is thinking of the emotional state or the interaction between an outside force, usually things like weight or when you're pressing down on something, and how those will affect the clavicles. all of that is coming down to using them. If you are not using clavicles, you're not posing out your animation. Honestly, that's it. If you're not using clavicles, that pose is not done. And if you've started animating and you haven't posed out with clavicles, go back to your posing. You haven't gotten enough information in there yet. Clavicles have to be in your animation, period. Nothing more. Now, does that mean that we always have to pose them? No. But we need to have a reason for not posing them. If the character is supposed to be like frozen in ice and just kind of in a T pose, yeah, then we don't need to pose it. Otherwise, think of where that clavicle should be. So that's pretty much it. Those are the common issues I see with clavicles. And again, it really boils down to just posing them. Really, you just have to pose them and think what they are doing. So yeah, I hope that helps, and I hope it made sense. Recently, I've been experimenting with the X-rotation clavicles to shape the chest and back for things like breathing, but I haven't heard of X-rotation clavicles talked about a lot. The big reason is that they don't really rotate in X that much. Usually it's just a subtle motion. Now, that's not to say that we're not going to use it, but it's a very kind of rare case. So for example, here I could use the X rotation to shape the back a little bit, but more often than not, it's just going to start caving in the chest. And if I do this the other way, it's going to start caving in the shoulders. So leaving them at default tends to work pretty well. Now, in cases like this, where we have a little bit more weight that we want to kind of curl the back, I might use just a little bit of X rotation to help shape that just a little bit. So it is definitely something I will think about, but very rarely and only in very extreme cases. So for example, here, I might think about a little X rotation here, just to kind of pump up that pectoral a little bit more. But again, very, very little. It's just a slight shaping. Most times I use this is when you are starting to get some distortion. If you're really exaggerating a pose, that's when the X rotation will start to come in.